Hi, I'm Gary Zacharias. I want to welcome you to another podcast of the Apologist bookshelf. Today I'd like to take a second look at a book that I covered sometime in the past. It's called Who Will Rule the Coming Gods? And it's subtitled The Looming Spiritual Crisis of Artificial Intelligence. And I find this just to be a fascinating subject because here's something that nobody can roll their eyes and say, big deal. It is a big deal. AI is getting huge. It's getting bigger all the time. And we need to be aware of what it's like and what it's going to do to us. So a previous podcast that I did, I took a look at his chapter 3 called The Effects of True Transcendence. And what he was talking about there was when you believe that there's a God, when you believe that there's a being out there who has created us and wants the best for us, then we live a certain way. Well, the next chapter is the one I want to do today. This is chapter 4, The Eclipse of True Transcendence. And he starts with a quotation that I agree. I mean, I find this so sad. James K.A. Smith said this in a book. How, in a relatively short period of time, did we go from a world where belief in God was the default assumption to our secular age, in which belief in God seems to many unbelievable? And that's exactly the question we should be asking and trying to figure out there. How do we go from a world where it was a default assumption? Everybody said, yeah, there's a God. And now here we are in a secular age that says, really? You believe in God? That's pretty far-fetched. And he says, any trend toward, now back to the author here, his name is Wallace Henley. And he says, any trend toward worshiping AI, being all excited about AI, he says it shows that we're at the ultimate outcome of secularization. And so he said that means that now, if we're in a world that belief in God is now unbelievable, then faith in the new gods is going to rise, right? Does that make sense? So if the idea of God goes away, you got to put your faith somewhere. And so the faith in the new imminent gods, what kind of God are we talking about? AI? And so he says, really, we're not living in an age of disbelief. We're living in an age of believing otherwise. Oh, that is so profound. People cannot live without faith. They cannot live without trust in something. They're going to create their own gods if they don't think there's a God out there. Does that sound familiar? That was all over the Old Testament, wasn't it? And he says, what is God to the technicians who wire moral codes and ethical boundaries into machines? What's their God? So if they're the ones that are creating these AI machines, what's their God? What's their belief? And it says if the maker thinks there are no values except whatever is in his or her subjective judgment, then that's going to be what's wired into the machine. The machine is going to reflect the values and the faith of the person who has created the machine. So pretty obvious, but I think that's something we really want to consider carefully. He says, if you really believe in a transcendent God, that affects your civilization in general. And he uses John Adams as a proof of that. And again, just this whole chapter really stunned me because it's got so much good information. Here's what John Adams said in 1798. We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. Can I go back and just say that one more time? John Adams, a huge warning. He says we don't have a government that has the power that can take hold of people and get them to do the right thing if they are unbridled by morality and religion. If they're cut loose from this transcendent belief in a God, we don't have a government strong enough to keep people under control. It's going to become some kind of all-seeing, all-snooping, heavy-handed police state. He says again, this is Adams again, our Constitution was made only for moral and religious people. If you set up that many freedoms that we have in our Constitution, and then you have people cut loose from morality and religion, he says it's going to be inadequate. He says if we lose our morality, we lose our religion, then the Constitution is going to be inadequate to a government of any other. All the ways that we're protected and the way the Constitution gives us freedoms, that's all going to go away. If we can't control ourselves, we're going to need an outside force to control us. I think that's amazing. Unfortunately, amazingly true. He quotes from David Berlinski, who says, "Some skeptics have no finer pleasure than recounting the history of religious brutality and persecution." All right, but there's more to the quote. And he's right. I mean, there has been some awful things that have happened in the name of religion. And he said, you get the skeptics that say, yeah, look at the, fill in the blank. Look at the Crusades. Look at the Inquisition. But Berlinski goes on. He says, however, there's an awkward fact in that the 20th century was not an age of faith, and it was awful. Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, Mao, and Pol Pot will never be counted among the religious leaders of mankind. So do you see the warning there? It's a warning just like John Adams said. If you throw out God, then human passions rise to the forefront, and that is not good. And so Berlinski is saying, take a look at the 20th century. We toss God aside, and what did we end up with? Brutality after brutality, more people killed in the 20th century than any other time period of life. So then he talks about Jeremiah Johnson, who is a graduate of Oxford. He's a professor of early Christianity at Houston Baptist University, and he's president of the Christian Thinkers Society. He said, if we get rid of true transcendence, he says, especially when you're thinking of Jesus Christ, if you throw all that out, he said, look what's happening. He said, we got hell on earth today: poverty, sickness, premature death, domestic violence, economic injustice, slavery, and political corruption is given. It's just what's going to happen. And he goes on. This is Johnston saying this: Christianity and a life lived according to the Bible shields us against a host of negative things. Boy, amen to that. The very standard of the life we enjoy in the West likely would disappear if Christianity vanished. Without Christian ethics and a Christian worldview, how much longer would freedom and morality last? So there we go again. The only reason we have any kind of freedom now is the vestiges of Christianity, but we're living in a post-Christian society. Are you noticing? I'm noticing that we are being stripped of our freedoms. And we are because we have to be. If we can't control ourselves, the state is going to control us. So there we go. He goes on. He said, we got three critical areas of thought that is being confused during this time period when we've given up on God. Number one, when we don't recognize true transcendence, we get confusion about the cosmos, the entire universe. And he mentions Stephen Hawking. He said, spontaneous creation is the reason there's something rather than nothing, why the universe exists, why we exist. It's not necessary to invoke God to light the blue touch paper and set the universe going. And he said, well, that's really interesting. So Hawking says, you can create something out of nothing. Well, that's absolutely absurd, but that's what you're forced to deal with. If you take God out of the picture, how do you get a universe here? So he said, and then it's thinking of the cosmos again. There's an absence of telos, T-E-L-O-S, telos. The universe has no purpose. If there's no God, there's no meaning. He said, if we have meaning and purpose, then the universe has meaning and purpose. But if the universe doesn't have any, then our lives don't have any. He references Ecclesiastes. He said, Solomon talks about that, about vanity of vanities. So here's another problem. He said, once we throw away the transcendent, he said it brings confusion about who we are as people and our value. And he gives an example here. Peter Singer, he's an atheist. People call him the world's greatest ethicist. Really? Well, he has served on the faculty at Princeton University. He speaks all over the place. And one person who heard him talk was so shocked that she turned from atheism to Christian faith. So what's he said? What kinds of things has Singer said? Remember, he doesn't think there's a God out there. So what does that do to human identity and value? He says human embryos or a fetus should not be regarded as having a right to life. He said it is. The fetus is a living being in the species Homo sapiens. But he said just because you're a member of the species, that doesn't give a being a right to life. So this is a quote from Singer again. Killing a defective infant is not morally equivalent to killing a person. Sometimes it's not wrong at all. And then further, he says there will be some non-human animals whose lives, by any standards, are more valuable than the lives of some humans. Yikes. That's terrible. Here's another problem that the author says is happening because we've lost this true transcendence. It leads to confusion about our society. He quotes political philosopher Russell Kirk. He thought that once you have spiritual disorder, it brings on political anarchy. And his quote from Russell is, "Our society's affliction is the decay of religious belief." Oh, man, that's exactly right. Really, really sad. There's no authority out there anymore. Here's another problem that Henley brings up regarding the loss of a belief in God. He said it plunges society into confusion regarding institutions that make it up. And he says there are 5 crucial institutions. You've got to have these if you're going to have a good society: church, family, education, government, and the business or the marketplace. He said usually they work together in a wholesome society, and he tells us what these institutions do and how important they are. But he says we've got confusion now because we've tossed God out. So there goes the whole collapse of our core institutions. He says, for example, in the family, he says we've lost structural cohesion. So there you go. How the family is supposed to run, that's been tossed aside. So he says, to wrap up the chapter here, we're in trouble. He said, we have given up the transcendent, and what have we done? Let me just go through these areas of thought again. We've lost the recognition of true transcendence, and that's brought about confusion about the cosmos. We now can say, the cosmos came from nothing, which doesn't make any sense. And then there's the absence of purpose, telos. If there's no meaning in the huge scale of things, then there's no meaning for us. And I have seen that over and over. I teach school, and I've had students in tears. They see no point to their lives, and they're very disturbed people. And we know that the suicide rate is very high for younger people because they're told over and over again there's no meaning to anything. You have to create your own meaning, which of course is almost impossible. One more thing he says, this is just a recap. Once you get rid of God or true transcendence, then you get confusion about who humans are and our value. And then he mentions Singer. Humans have no value. You better produce. That's the only way you're going to have any value in this society. You better produce. If you're weak or you have some other disabilities of some kind, then you may be set to disappear. One other thing, you get rid of true transcendence, we get confusion about our society. And because we're losing our religion, our society begins to break down. And especially, he says, it breaks down in church and family and education and government and the business marketplace. Well, I think he's exactly right. This book is a tremendous warning. He does a wonderful job. Wallace Henley's the author. Again, it's called Who Will Rule the Coming Gods? I've used this book when I've prepared a talk on artificial intelligence. I think it's really well done. He says his big question is, are we going to let artificial intelligence eclipse the true God? And that's the question that we need to ask ourselves. Yes, AI can do some wonderful things, but in the big picture, there's that tendency to let it take over and become the new God, and it's not going to be a pleasant future. Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry this is a kind of a negative one, but we're called to see what's going on in society and try to improve it. As Christians, we want to be salt here on earth. So thank you, and I hope you have a good rest of the day, and we'll do another podcast soon.